Thank you. Superintendent Harris, I said to you privately and will reiterate publicly that I will not support any stablecoin legislation that preempts the New York State Department of Financial Services or otherwise encroaches on the sovereignty of New York State. As a New Yorker, that is a red line for me. When it comes to finance, there's a long tradition of dual regulation. Just like banking has both a federal option and a state option, stablecoin issuance should have both a federal option and a state option. And a state option should exist not only on paper, but in practice. The federal government should certainly have a floor that prevents regulatory arbitrage, to be sure, but there's no need for a ceiling that preempts either in theory or in practice. Does the proposed legislation before us create a genuine system of dual regulation?
Thank you so much, Congressman. It's been such a pleasure to get to know you and work with you since taking this role, so I appreciate your partnership. I think there are improvements that could certainly be made to the present legislation. Although it has language that states nothing in the legislation will preempt states in practice, I think there are a number of provisions that give federal regulators veto authority over state regulators and their judgments and oversights that would be counterproductive and provide a disincentive for companies to take a state path.
So we're not quite there yet.
Not quite yet.
Do you agree that stablecoin issuers should be fully reserved and that those reserves should consist of 100% cash or cash equivalents?
Absolutely, and that's what we do in New York.
And do you agree that those stablecoin reserves should be verified not only by self-attestation but also by a third-party audit?
Yep, and that's what we do in New York.
You know, common sense dictates that you cannot have an honor system in which a charlatan like Sam Bankman-Fried claims to be fully reserved and then the regulators take his word for it.
Exactly.
The PWG report proposes banking regulation for stablecoin issuers. But since a stablecoin issuer has no fractionalization of reserves and no lending function like a bank, it would seem to me that a stablecoin issuer operates differently from a bank and therefore should be regulated differently. Mr. Shavinsky, do you agree with that analysis?
I completely agree, and I think that we can design reasonable, tailored regulations for non-bank entities to issue stablecoins in a way that is just as safe and sound as a bank doing the same.
SEC Chair Gary Gensler asserts that an alternate regulatory framework for crypto would, quote, undermine 90 years of securities law. Since American federalism has 50 laboratories of democracy, we can actually test that thesis, that hypothesis, against the regulatory experience of one of those laboratories, New York State. So in New York State, crypto regulation is segregated from securities regulation. The New York State Department of Financial Services regulates crypto, whereas the New York State Attorney General regulates securities. So has the Gensler hypothesis been proven right or wrong in New York? Has a separate regulatory framework for crypto undercut securities regulation?
So what I would say is our authorities do not depend on definitions about what is a security, what is a commodity, what is a currency. At DFS, we have blanket authority over virtual assets, and we exercise it accordingly. Some of our companies are also subject to registration requirements with the AG, and I think what we've done in New York has proved quite successful for some of the reasons we've discussed today.
So has a separate licensing regime for crypto come at the expense of regulatory rigor?
No, not at all, to the contrary.
In fact, New York State DFS is the most rigorous regulator of crypto in the country.
And I would say in the world.
In fact, what state was the first state to raise red flags about the insufficient reserves of Tether? It was not the SEC, it was not the CFTC, it was the state of New York.
Correct.
And so the notion that a separate regulatory framework for crypto would undermine 90 years of securities law has been definitively disproven in New York State. The legacy financial system has high fees and long delays that prey upon the lowest income Americans. Poor people of color have to pay predatory fees in order to transfer their own money to loved ones abroad. Stablecoin has the ability to function as a currency, and blockchain has the ability to move money from peer to peer in real time. Mr. Campbell, is it fair to say that the combination of those two technologies have the potential to create a better, cheaper, and faster payment system? That question's for Mr. Campbell and Mr. Disparte.
I thank you for the question, and I would say yes, unequivocally. The beauty of a blockchain is it treats everybody the same. If you have low fees, high transparency, high ability to transact, everybody can use it regardless of the amount of money they have, and I think that is one of the best features of this new technological innovation.
Unequivocally.
Short and sweet. I yield back.